you want to go ahead and just get started?
Sounds good. I will hand it off to, believe Dee is going to start off.
Hello and welcome to All Electric Buildings, Stories from the Field. My name is Dee Karawan and I am co-chair of COTE, which stands for Committee on the Environment. And I would like to thank our sponsor, Hayward Lumber. And I would also like to thank 3C Ren and Inbalanced Green for today's presentation and for always giving us amazing content. And now I'll turn it over to Michelle Zimney of Inbalanced Green.
Thank you, Dee. We're really excited to be here today. I'm going to get Andy to start sharing her screen. There we go. Today's program, All Electric from the Field, is sponsored by 3C Ren. And so I've got a few slides to handle since Itzel is not able to join us. Next slide. Most of you know by now, 3C Ren is Tri-County Regional Energy Network, and it's a program that spans the 3 counties in this Tri-County region. It provides services for building professionals and households funded by ratepayer dollars, collected by utilities in our region. They have 3 main program areas: the Energy Code Connect, Building Performance Training, and Home Energy Savings. Thanks. Energy Code Connect, if you're not already familiar with it, is a great service for folks, especially as code changes are coming up in the next year. And it's got 3 service areas: the Code Coach, which you can consult with your questions, training and support, as well as regional fora. And there's one upcoming next month, so keep your ears and eyes out for that. Either of those websites at the bottom will get you more information. Building Performance Training, of which this webinar is part, serves current and prospective building professionals, offering instruction in technical skills as well as soft skills. And the third performance area, Home Energy Savings, is just gearing up. It's ramping up. It'll be offering services for multifamily and single family homes. And you can see some of their offerings there. Their websites provide more information. And without further ado, I'll just formally introduce myself. I am Michelle Zimney, Senior Sustainability Consultant at Inbalanced Green Consulting. And today, our program, All Electric Buildings, Stories from the Field, will be presented by Jennifer Rennick, AIA, as well as a certified energy analyst, and Andy Pease, AIA, and lead AP BD&C. It's a special treat because we don't usually have both principals from our firm joining us. Unfortunately, Mike Horgan, who had been scheduled to present, is unable to make it. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Jen and Andy, and we are in capable hands. Sorry, one more thing. I will be monitoring the chat. So the program does allow for about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. If folks have questions, go ahead, add them to the chat. And I'll just sort of be monitoring that, collecting them, and inserting myself into the program when questions seem particularly pertinent, but we will also allow time at the end. Without further ado, let me hand it off to Jen and Andy.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. We're excited to be making this presentation. Of course, there's continuing education units available. And then just to go over the topics for today, we're talking about all electric buildings, and this is 860 on the Y, which has been up and running as an all electric building for quite a few years now. So as electric buildings come online, we're taking notes. Where have been the challenges and successes, and so hopefully we can keep going forward with more and more success. So the overview here, why we're going to talk about why all electric in the first place, about appliances, starting with cooktops, because that's huge, heat pumps, electricity, just kind of panels and that, and then with some resources for some incentives. And then as Michelle noted, we'll really hoping to have some Q&A. What are your experiences? What are your questions? So jumping in with the overview, we've been having a theme of higher performance buildings. So if you've been participating in this series, thank you. They build on each other to a certain extent, but we're basically trying to lift the bar in as least of painless ways as we can, because we know that the higher performance buildings of today have lower energy bills. There's not the moisture problems and the indoor air quality problems that come with that. There's comfort that's more consistent technologies are up to date, it's current, healthy, resilient, and increasingly all electric. That's what we're seeing, the trends for California code. They'll continue to go in that direction. And it's making sense for all those reasons. So when we talk about a systems approach, we're talking about an envelope that doesn't have thermal bridging, that doesn't have the air leakage. Our windows are really excellent. We have the good insulation and balanced ventilation, right? So that we have it healthy. And then we add in the all electric component. So it's got renewable energy, right? So that'll be cost effective. It's safe because you're not ending up with any of the toxins from burning fossil fuels. And of course, that's helping for the climate action and zero carbon. But implementation, as we know, can be tricky. So the general issues that we've encountered is that folks often have outdated information. Builders are builders are reluctant to jump into electric. So we might have a homeowner or an architect on board, but not the builder, or the other way around. So some combination. The costs are not always what we think they ought to be. So we say it's going to be one cost and a different experience when we get together. In making it happen. And then there's just technical nuance, like, okay, how do we actually make this happen? And so our responses in general is that we do need to acknowledge that there are some real challenges during this transition. So we're going to talk about sharing the fixes and the options and addressing gaps in the education, training, supply, who's able to do this work, and keep evolving and responding as we go. So let's talk about the specifics. We're going to jump in with appliances. And the issue that we really see here is it's about consumer reluctance. And we start with this because sometimes this one item ends up being the reluctance for the entire going all electric, right? So a lot of folks have these old ideas about electric cooking, that they still think of those resistance. For them, electric cooking is that old kind of model rather than induction cooktops. And so, and then there's a look, right? We had somebody in the office, his mom was doing a big kitchen remodel. She wanted kind of that fancy, old fashioned country kitchen, and induction cooktops didn't necessarily come in that style. Thankfully, they're doing better. So our response is to be thinking that there's a range of options. And it's just, as we have more experience, more products coming on the line, and we just need to keep clarifying that we're talking about induction. It's different. There's a lot of professional chefs that are using induction. There's a gazillion videos out here. I'm going to actually go ahead and play one it's just like a minute and a half, so that you can kind of see and be able to talk to your clients about it.
It is not a barrier for cooking certain foods. You can easily char a pepper really beautifully. Look at that. You can get tortillas just crisp and beautiful. Oh my goodness, look at this. Tortillas just come alive. You get a
Note that it's a really nice pan that's able to get hot.
Over here, wok cooking, you definitely need a big flat bottom wok. This one works amazing, and this thing gets smoking hot. So my wok.
Yeah, so a lot of Asian kitchens we're seeing are using this really easily.
It is also not a reason to throw out your cookware. All of the cookware that we're going to show you right now, that all works on induction, and many more. As long as a magnet sticks to it, it's going to work. That's your test. So I can tell you what induction is. It is significantly more powerful. So I'll put this on. You can see this is room temperature water. And yes, I have $20 bill here.
This is a gimmick they do all the time, right? That there's no flame down there. It's not actually getting hot at the stove level. It's just heating the pot.
When I am talking about control, it's much more controllable. Instead of having to, pancakes, throwing out the first couple pancakes as you're looking down and you're trying to figure out how hot your pan is. With induction cooking, I have actually learned the exact temperature that is perfect for pancakes. So.
All right, so that is just a sneak peek at the kind of sales and successes that we're seeing. We're also noticing that a lot of times cooking shows because they're portable. Obviously, you don't have gas lines. There's also kind of an interesting quick fix that we're seeing happen in these induction, kind of a transition to just get induction burners. So here's like 2 burners, $200. They were showing a professional chef at home in I think he was in Japan, and they had these tiny apartments, and that's what he cooks on. He doesn't have any other cooktop. So even just a 1 burner, you can see that they're affordable and small. This double one is just 12 pounds. So another guy here in SLO, he just uses the induction like 80% of the time, but still has the stove for when he's, needs a lot of burners. All right, Jennifer, you want to chime in on some clothes dryers?
I do, and I also want to let you guys know that one of our recent clients doing a really substantial remodel came up, and again, they're engineers, they were into the all electric, and it was the cooking appliance that stopped them. And I mentioned induction, and the engineer, he just kind of rolled his eyes, goes, yeah, I know, like that. And I said, well, have you considered just purchasing a 1 or 2 burner unit like Costco? The next time you go to Costco, pick one up and just see what you think before you keep rolling your eyes at me. And so he's like, being an engineer, more science-ish related, was like, okay, his wife said, let's do it. Let's just, before you keep rolling your eyes. So they did it. And then they called me up and they said, yeah, you were right. It was way faster, way better. We've picked out our induction unit now. And they picked out one of those Wolf units that's induction instead of going the other way around. So I mean, it really does help. It does work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when it comes to going all electric, the one place we also see, it's not really resistance. It's like, nah, when you think about dryers, some of our builders are like, sure, we can put in dryers, but it's going to cost the client more to run that electric dryer than it will a gas dryer. And I have to remind them, well, we're talking about ventless dryers. We're talking about condensing dryers, heat pump dryers, and those are going to operate at much lower energy levels and don't require quite the oomph, quite the voltage and the amps that you need with the standard electric. And so this is a good way to add to your all electric house. But the reason we especially like the ventless style is because literally we don't have to put a big hole in the wall to vent the super hot, moist air to the outdoors. So the overall advantage for like passive house energy efficiency is that there's no vent. So under the ventless style, and we use the word ventless because that is how you will find it when you do your searches online. I've tried a million times condensing, heat pump, not so much comes up, but if I just go straight away to ventless, then it opens the door to both the heat pump and condensing. Technically, both have condenser coils in them. The difference between the condensing and the heat pump is that the heat pump dryer has a refrigerant cycle in it, and it's hermetically sealed, and it's exactly like what you have on your refrigerator already. And they use that very, very cold refrigerant to condense the moisture out of the air. So it creates very dry air and low heat that's used to dry the clothes. The condensing dryer does the same thing. It just doesn't use refrigerant for that process. This is how Bosch describes it. And so I picked this one because it's got a great diagram of their condensing dryer as opposed to their heat pump dryer. But basically air from around your house or wherever it's installed, is pulled in through the unit at number 1. And then that air circulates past the condensing coils, and it is combined with warm air from the drum itself. So you're drying out the warm air from the drum, and you're drying out the air that you've pulled in from around the house. that gets dried out, and then it's reheated and on a low heat and then put back into the drum. And so it's continually moving through that cycle. So what that means is that these types of dryers have to have a place for that condensate, for that water to go. And what they'll do, depending on the dryer model, is that it'll either already have a situation where it's drained out through a hose, which is smaller than what you have for your washing machine, but it's very similar. Some of the units, if they're stackable, they'll even have the hose feed into the washer that then feeds out to the drain, or the water's going to go to a reservoir, and a lot of them will have a reservoir at the upper left-hand side of that unit, and you can pull it out and dump the water out. I recommend the hose. The other thing they all have is a condenser coil. Some of the units, you have to remember to go to the bottom of your dryer unit and pull out the condensing coil and clean it off manually at least once a month to get lint off of it, and dust. And if it stays clean, it's going to work really well. Again, you might consider going with a unit that has a self-cleaning condenser coil. Now, here's the story from the field. This is my nephew's apartment. My nephew and my sister know about all this technology. They hear me talk about it all the time. So they were pretty darn sure. They told me, we got the heat pump dryer. And I was like, great. And their clothes weren't drying. They were really bummed. And so I said, what model number do you have? Which one did you actually get? So their apartment was designed for the one that's called quote unquote heat pump. And it only needs a little bit of ventilation around it, just needs a door cut low at the top and cut low or cut up a bit at the bottom, and you'll get enough air. But actually the builder ended up installing the Bosch condensing version of it, which requires like louver doors. It requires more air because it's not quite as efficient. And so for a $300 upgrade, you know, what they thought they were getting is the actual heat pump style. They ended up with the condenser type, both self-drain. And so, you know, the solution in this case is to just leave the doors open. What they had planned, you could get louver doors, or they could call them out, call the installer out and say, no, we really wanted the other ones. We want them. So that's why it's good to know about those things.
So, and as we look at our appliances overall, we're trying to make the judgments based on the overall energy use, but also the peak energy load, right? But if we think about the efficiency of our appliances as we go along, an old refrigerator might use 1,700 kilowatt hours in a year, and a newer one might be 450 kilowatt hours in a year, which is great, unless you take the old one and put it in the garage. Don't do that if you can possibly help it. So each of these are going to have units, and you can see a washing machine is actually a relatively low energy use. A good one is going to have a lot of spin to it, so then that makes it easier to dry. And then the dryer actually can be a significant energy user. So an electric dryer that's efficient might still be lower than an old electric dryer, but you could get down to 150 kilowatts hours per year in a one of those heat pump types of units. And in a remodel, as we talk about new appliances using less energy, it's also that might ease some space on your electrical panel, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Andy,
all right, let's jump. Yeah, go ahead.
Move on. There is a question. I think it'd be a quick answer for folks, and I was wondering too. From Tom, how does drying time of a ventless dryer compare to the drying time of a gas dryer? Any thoughts?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. It's going to be twice as long. That's my rule of thumb that I tell people, twice as long. So I know, I'm in the process of swapping this out in my own place. And my gas dryer, you know, I could dry my clothes in like 20 minutes, but of course they're baked and the fabrics are ruined. My sister is also a textile design person. She tells me all the time, you're ruining your clothes, she tells me. So she is very happy to get the condensing dryer, low heat, saves the fabrics, but it you know, like you might be in there for an hour if you're used to it being, you know, 20 to 30 minutes in your gas dryer. If you were drying on high heat, that is. But you can't do high heat on the other units if you have to. You can't.
And as a side note, I use my solar dryer about 90% of the year. So clothesline, it takes about 2 hours on a sunny day. On a sunny day, less, like half an hour. It's crazy how fast a sunny day can also bake your clothes, I suppose. All right. Thanks, Michelle and Tom for that. Okay, so the heat pumps. So we've always talked about those as kind of the foundation of all electric construction. And what we're finding, though, is that the issues from past experience, past performance are really correcting misinformation. So here's a story of me, and I'm talking to my neighbor who's super smart. Oh, wait, hold on. This is me. Let me get to scale here. Okay. So I remember, so he talks about heat pumps, they're expensive. They don't work in cold weather. They break down. You still need a furnace. So when he replaced his unit, I was trying to tell him about heat pumps, but he ended up still doing a furnace replacement and an air conditioning. We just couldn't spin him, kind of pivot that quickly enough. So to be able to kind of like talk about what is going on with heat pumps. So here's some key talking points as that we find are most effective. One is just about the efficiency. Heat pumps don't generate heat, they transfer existing heat that's out in the air either way. So they're much more energy efficient, as you can see from this graph to the right. Heat pumps provide heating and cooling, so they're cost effective, right? So if it's going to be more expensive than just a standalone furnace, but if you're doing air conditioning, use the same unit to do both. In new construction, everybody's using heat pumps. And they're quiet, they're compact, they work in all weather. There used to be just kind of one fan speed. Now they're variable. So there's just a lot of great things going on with heat pumps. I won't spend a lot of time on this. We have a whole 3C Ren seminar on heat pumps and how to install them. But I just want to kind of lay out the parts and pieces to demystify. This is Jennifer's house. This is Jennifer's dog, Sparky. And these are just kind of a kit of parts that come in. There's an outdoor unit, there's lines, there's boxes. This particular line is the electrical communication and wires all together in it. And you need to coordinate with an electrician. That's definitely a lesson learned, is making sure that that the installer is not necessarily, there may be an HVAC contractor, not an electrician, so make sure you get a set. There's a pad that's on the ground. You can mount this thing outside. You can, figure out where the line is going to go. And then on the inside, it's just a pretty straightforward wall unit. There's, you mount the bracket. There's the contents inside. It's a wall unit. So, and Jennifer, I think that you were, trying to figure out where to put the unit in your own house. Is that right? And they were able to use an outside wall.
Yes. So I had an idea of where I thought the unit should go, and then they came out and they took a look at it, and they just reminded me that on the back side of each of these wall units, or even indoor, all the units do have condensate, heat pump. They condensate, just like your refrigerator. It's in a little tray usually, but it usually evaporates. Well, these make more condensation than your refrigerator, but putting them in outside wall was ideal. So we said, okay, we changed the location on that. That was a snap. And then 3 hours later, they were done, completely functional, finished, done in 3 hours. So I have 3 heads on the inside, the outdoor unit on the outside. and that project costs $15,000, and it was just under $1,000 for the electrician.
1,500?
It's a $15,000.
15,000.
Yeah, and then just under $1,000 for the electrician. So some people say, oh, is that expensive? Not expensive. It's not expensive when I looked at having my old stuff fixed or replaced. I was like in the boat of that neighbor. It was going to cost me close to $30,000 to get an air conditioning, which I didn't have, and get the whole furnace fixed and replaced and upgraded. So for me, this was a great deal. And I got rid of all my ducks. I didn't particularly like them anyway. So that was easy for me. Yeah.
And you got to put them in a row, all your ducks in a row.
Yes.
Your ducks in a row.
Question.
Great.
Dee was wondering, did you put one interior unit for the whole house or one on the exterior plus how many on the interior?
Yeah. So for my house, that's the outside unit on my house. And I have 3 indoor units in my house. So I have a house that's small. So each bedroom got one of these indoor units, and then a slight, the capacities for the bedrooms were the smallest capacity on the indoor unit. And then I had the one larger indoor unit on the wall that serves my living room and kitchen area.
And then if Mike were here, he would note that in a new construction, we might actually only do one head, but have a ducted ventilation system so that the air movement happens through the ventilation and fresh air, introduction of fresh air and the heat recovery ventilator. And then just one unit is doing a little bit of adjusting on the thermal adjustments.
Right. And then
Fair.
each indoor unit has its own thermostat. So my kids could control their 2 thermostats all they want, which is part of the reason I made sure they each had one in their room. And then the remainder of the house just has the one head with the one thermostat. And my room opens up right onto our living room, and it heats it all, and it's fine. It's perfectly comfortable. So
Great.
that's how we do
Good
it.
question. Yeah, appreciate that. Well, another issue that comes up in terms of heat pumps is basically where to put the stuff on the residential. You just saw it's fairly straightforward. You just put the one unit down on the ground and multiple heads inside. In a multifamily housing, this is actually Deborah Woodle from 196 Architects had attended one of our earlier webinars. And so she was trying to go with a heat pump, but realized that the unit itself would need an access door. And so she was trying to design in this multifamily housing. And so she, in that entryway, you can often do a little drop soffit there. And then she found this pretty trick little Balco access door that folds, and it's sheetrock. And so the unit just stays up in there. In a commercial setting, this is People's Self-Help Housing office building. And so they made a little, a courtyard, just like a little enclosed space to ground mount these very large units. And then heat pump water heaters. Michelle has her own story from the field as she was trying to go all electric with her water heater.
Right, so I had about a 10-year-old tankless gas water heater, which was dying, obviously. Lucky for us, right after we put solar panels on the roof, it did die. And so my thought of eventually replacing and using a heat pump water heater became a reality, and it needed to happen fast. So the first sort of thing to know is that it's still hard to make this happen fast. And that's kind of in everybody's mind, right? Oh, we have no hot water. We got to like just get something in there. So it's best done on new construction or as a sort of measured retrofit measure. I knew what I wanted thanks to working with Jen and Andy and Mike so much. And I had picked out the equipment, but finding somebody to install it was another matter. You know, like a good homeowner, I said, I'm going to get multiple bids. So I definitely recommend get your 3 bids. And it was enlightening. Finding a contractor that was confident enough to bid it properly was time consuming. I probably talked to 4 or 5 plumbers, and the bids ranged anywhere from $1,250 to install and tie into existing plumbing up to $6,000, not including equipment. So, and it's a little disorienting at first, like how could it be $6,000, right? But with some time, you'll find somebody confident enough to know that it's basically like installing any water heater. I did go with the guy that said $1,250 installed with insulation. And so, but it was helpful because 2 or 3 of them actually tried to talk me out of getting a heat pump water heater. So you need to know what you want, and you need to know kind of why you want it and where it's going to go, and then build in some time to find the contractor that's going to be able to do it at your price point. Easier said than done, right, in this crazy construction market. So the issue number 2 then that I wanted to just touch on was the way to integrate recirc pumps into your heated water system. We all know that it's awesome to run these on timers or recirc them continuously, and you've got hot water at all your fixtures. We've got old plumbing, and I basically just wanted to be able to get hot water to my farthest fixture, which was 60 feet away, plumbing line. And so I thought, well, can we do an on-demand recirc pump? I've had one in my kitchen forever. It works great. But trying to get it to go out 60 feet to the farthest fixture took a little bit of research, talked to the manufacturers, and it turns out, while not ideal, they do give you diagrams. And they say, well, if you're going to do it this way. And I had my diagram in hand, and I showed it to my contractor. And then he sent 2 guys over to install the whole thing. They didn't pay attention to any of it. And it ended up getting installed in a way that wasn't ideal, now that I know. But I guess the response I would recommend for folks is, you know, provide those diagrams and get it in writing that that's how it's going to be installed. Because, you know, the contract and the installation aren't always matching, and you can't always be there to watch it. This is new enough technology and combinations that people will default into kind of their regular way of doing business. And there are some adjustments that need to be made. So that's my little diagram for a Rheem system with a recirc pump straight from the manufacturer. And if we had done it that way, it would work great. As it is, you can see there's a pump. Andy, do you have a pointer? Down low on my water heater, they put it into the drain line, and it really should have gone in on the cold line on the backside. It's working for now, and it might be good enough, but I'm pretty sure my warranty is probably voided. So a couple of quick lessons on heat pump water heaters.
Thanks, Michelle. It was kind of a all office project to be like, well, did you know, what about this and try that? So another thing about heat pump water heaters is that they need some physical space for air movement. So the tank is not that big. You can certainly put it in a garage type of thing, but it does need some air. So this is a project in which the contractor was doing, or owner was doing an ADU on the back of their property, drawing in a gas line and using, their initial plan was to use a tankless water heater that was gas. And then they realized that they'd be able to drop gas. Everything else was electric, that they were comfortable with that. And so, but because it was an ADU, it didn't have a garage adjacent. They didn't have the space inside. So they built a little unit, a little closet, kind of a shed outside with a door that was louvered. And so it's protected from the elements. This case, they didn't have to insulate it. Some locations you would make more sense to insulate it. But basically, they were able to just make that substitution, drop the gas line, and save 150 feet of gas line to this unit. So you can do an indoor closet if you have it vented to the exterior, so you can get air in that way, or you can do an outdoor closet, or of course in the garage to give enough space. This is kind of a model installation that's for people's self-help housing, drawn to scale here. So you can see that the unit itself is just about 6 feet tall. There's a dedicated electrical circuit over here. On this one, you can see the condensate floor drain that has the condensate drain and the relief valve. And then there's the pressure mixing valve, and then an expansion tank over here. And you can see that all of the pipes are insulated. It's kind of, when Jennifer saw that, she's like, oh my God, get pictures. It's like a model installation because you can see all the parts and pieces. So that's commercial.
It's
And then we'll
a
jump-
really good installation. It's actually beautiful.
Yeah, and it's actually an interesting story in the sense that people self-help for their residential units. You know, they do affordable housing, and they're trying to go all electric on their housing. So they were the builder for their own new office building that's 30,000 square feet, and so they had to do the same considerations, but in commercial terms, in terms of heat pumps for heating and air conditioning. That was easy. But the switch to a heat pump water heater was new to them at this scale. So they really did their research and did it right. All right, so electricity. So this is our chance to be able to talk about panels and what goes on with that. Jennifer, you want to jump in here?
Yeah. We added this section we're going to do next because like Andy said, we have a whole section on the heat pump, or a whole presentation, couple of them actually, on the heat pump space heating, kind of ins and outs, all the different types and ways to mount them. And then we do a whole nother session on the heat pump water heaters, because those also come as like the integrated type you just saw, and split system, meaning indoor tank, outdoor heat pump unit. And one question that comes up a lot is, all that sounds great, but what happens if you don't think your panel's large enough? Or what if you have to upgrade to a larger panel? Or what should you consider getting wired in now when you have the electrician out for one project? Maybe since it's hard to get folks out to your house these days, get them out to wire it up for all the things you might need. So this is a list of the items that would more than likely, or could possibly affect your either circuitry or wiring or panel size. So if you have like a gas dryer now, which is my situation, now I need an electrician to come out for the electric heat pump dryer I want, and so here's my recommendation. This can work for your clients if you're working on remodels, additions. Some of this is code for new construction, but the idea is that you pre-wire for those appliances and those things that we were just looking at. So the top and the panel, this is an example of what you may do for code for a heat pump water heater, but it's also appropriate for all your other 240 volt needs, where you can get that plug outlet installed that you can use, just as a regular plug, but the whole thing can be easily converted over to a 240 use, like a dryer, electric dryer. And same can be used for some of your other electric appliances. And on the outside of your house, you could go ahead and install the 15 amp or 30 amp, depending on your need, box. So this one, that bottom one, that's an example of the split system for heating hot water. And that only requires a 15 amp box for that. And then a lot of those mini splits are usually 30 amps. But it's good to get these things in ahead of time if you can do it. Now that's what a panel looks like. Yeah. Okay. This is real life. This is my panel. This beautiful looking piece of machinery and electronics is the way that it was pretty much how it looked when I got the house. Down at the bottom where it says AC heat split system, that's where those two breakers down there is what the two they added for that 30 amp mini split I have. But even when they showed up, there wasn't even that There wasn't even that crazy cut piece of metal covering the top. It was just wide open. So I learned a lot in work doing this stuff on my house. Now my house, it turns out it only has a 100 amp panel. So new code is 200 amp. The new code coming out in 2022 is going to be 225 amp panel required. So I wanted to know, am I going to be able to add this stuff? And at what point am I going to have to upgrade my panel? When am I going to run out of room? And so there's a rule of thumb you guys can use. So you can also look this up on, I Googled this in on the internet, not this steps, but I mean, I Googled to see what you would find on the internet. And there are a number of folks who offer up guiding people through step 1, step 2, step 3, et cetera. So you can determine if your electric panel is going to be large enough to add things. They're usually doing this because folks want electric EV charging has been the main impetus. I did this because I want induction unit, and I want to know if my induction cooking is going to force me to get a new panel before I'm ready to get the panel upgrade to go with some of the other stuff on my all electric project.
And we should have started with, we'll provide these slides at the end to attendees.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
get a PDF. Don't feel like you have to have this memorized for those of you who actually want to dive in at that level.
Yeah, so I, being, you know, a number person that I am, I made a little spreadsheet with those steps and those formulas in there. And the first step is you look at how your square footage. My house is small. It's a 1,200 square foot house. And you just multiply that times 3 watts per square foot, just an average to give you an idea of how many watts of demand that you're going to have on from your lighting and your plugs. And then the rule of thumb is for a really small kitchen, you'd have at least, you know, a 20 amp circuit, bigger kitchen more. I threw my microwave in there, my fridge, dishwasher, washer. I do have a place where I can plug in my family's RV when they visit. I use a car trickle charger right now. And then there's a formula that you follow. Then you throw in your mini splits. Bottom line was, when I did all that, this is after my mini splits, I only needed 79, you know, amp. I have a 100 amp panel. It's like, okay, no brainer. That part worked. Now, when I go to add the induction, even though I got a little bit of credit on my upgraded dishwasher, upgraded fridge, my upgraded washer, that doesn't really override how much kind of oomph you need for those induction units. And this is a slide-in unit that I'm getting. And so when I did that, it's like, yeah, I'm really close to the 100 amp panel. So I'm going to go for it anyway. If because I'll be able to finish doing the work and get my permit. But my very next part of the project, you know, as soon as I add one more thing on my all electric upgrade, which is going to be the heat pump water heater and the EV charging, then I'm well over that. And I'm closer to 130 amps, but I'll probably upgrade to the 200 amp anyway and get solar.
Great.
Yeah.
Speaking of solar. So let's jump in here. I know we're, want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. With renewable energy, we're basically seeing 2 main issues that are coming up. Either not enough space for the solar panels or the upfront costs become barriers. So starting with the not enough space is as we think about it, that planning ahead, that exercise that Jennifer went through in terms of knowing all of your loads, baseline per code, all electric is going to be more, and then your car or cars. And you can always start smaller as long as you plan for all the future units, right? So if you're not quite sure how much electricity you're going to be using, you can always add on later as you need to. That's what we did at our house. We had 12 panels put on over 10 years ago. And then a couple of years ago, we're noticing, because we had a plug-in car, so we added another 6 panels on a different orientation. The location is one of the first things we always talk to architects about is for new construction is to simplify the roof forms. a whole bunch of textural changes, might look nice for the ARC, but it really does make it problematic to be able to have clusters of solar panels. So and be careful on the varied heights, the parapets, chimneys, if you can put those to the north side, that's certainly more helpful, or low enough that they're not going to shade. And just think about where else you can put those panels in terms of over parking, et cetera. And then there's orientation itself. If your roof is flat or close to flat, it doesn't really matter the orientation. But if you're on a sloped roof 2 and 12 or greater, most orientations work. You might you might have to add more panels if you're on a more northerly or easterly orientation. But anything with that kind of south, southwest, west, all of those work really well. And with the peak cost for electricity now between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., right? It used to be like 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. So now it's shifted later. So southwest or mix of orientations is really the way that you want to go with that. Here's another, because this is kind of part 2 of that people's self-help housing, where they put the equipment on the ground to leave the entire roof for solar panels. They're offsetting, I think it was designed about 70% offset. It's still being commissioned, so I don't have the current numbers. But they were able to not have any parapet, so all they had to leave at the edge was just enough for the walkway. They banked the inverters against a little low wall, but that was it for kind of disruptive roof construction. And then part 2 of the renewable energy is that upfront cost, and this is a little bit of a conversation, right? In terms of renewable solar panels are not a construction cost. It's a power purchase decision, and we need to reframe solar panels as thinking of them as just like a monthly utility bill. So that we're thinking about, you got to pay for electricity every month. You're either going to be paying for it by financing your solar panels, or you're paying it to PG&E. So think about it in those ways to be able to talk about and get the right size of the system. And loans, often even on day one, you're going to be cash positive in terms of your loan payment compared to what your electric bills used to be. And then you can consider leasing. There's not an upfront cost. They're convenient. It's for a price, right? It's not quite as efficient if you do a mortgage yourself, but it's a tool for those who want to be able to make that happen. And there's some pretty creative approaches that are coming online. So nonprofits, if it's like a church or a nonprofit, there's a company that'll come in and they sell the tax credits so that it still becomes affordable. I just heard about a company here in San Luis that's doing multi-tenant commercial spaces. It's a big problem. Like who's going to pay for the solar panels versus who gets the benefit. So, and I know, Jennifer, you were looking at kind of the leasing options as well for your upgrade. Yes.
Yeah. I'm seriously considering it just because it's can be super convenient, and I'm in the process of needing to put what cash I do have, I need to put it into something else right now. So this way, if I do the lease, it's looking like a pretty good way, because I'll save about $100 to $150 right off the bat on each of my monthly electric bills, because I do have an electric car. I'm nearly 100% electric on the house, so I need the PVs. And that way I can save that monthly fee and then put that cash into something else that's come up. So I'm seriously considering it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're trying to be, different options to be able to get those kinds of results. And then the batteries is, again, just making enough space for those. You need about 10 feet of length and 8 feet high. Group them together as much as you can. Try not to have, one out of sight of the other if you can help it. It's okay to wrap it on an inside corner. And then just to recognize that they don't pay for themselves right now still. But there is a value of that intangible for the resiliency piece. So we are seeing more and more folks installing them and looking at kind of their critical loads, the refrigerators, key lighting, and some outlets. So a relatively small battery can really make a difference. And then, of course, we're just looking forward to the technology of your car battery being part of your resilience. I was just seeing a program where they're using school buses, electric school buses, as little portable batteries for a crisis, because they're mobile, right? You don't need them very often, and then you can just wheel them over to whoever needs it. So some pretty neat things happening. And then, of course, in the new code cycle, we're going to continue to see increased value for those batteries. All right, and then to wrap up, we're just going to share a couple of resources here. One is the Tech Clean California program. It's for contractors. And Jennifer, this is the, it's a contractor-based system, right, through
Yes.
a state program. Sorry,
Yes,
I don't know.
sorry,
about
I was
this one.
looking for that unmute button right there. Specifically, this part, heat pump water heaters. So this is one of the solutions that's coming on board and solution to starting to build the market. So unfortunately, Michelle's experience is not the only one, where now an individual homeowner knows they want the heat pump water heater, and now it's tricky to get the plumber to come out and really do it. In new construction, we haven't had any trouble with that at all, because we've got a general, general contractors on board. They've got plumbers who can install all the stuff that they need, but that individual homeowner is having a hard time. So now, if you could get your plumber to enroll in the tech program, then they can qualify for incentives. There's a $6,600 incentive for, I looked up almost every zip code in our Tri-County region, and I didn't see any that were not part of the higher dollar incentive. So, as architects, what I did is I printed out the forms from tech. I went there, and I'm going to hand it to the plumber that's going to be coming out to the house and find out if get him installed and enrolled, sorry.
Great. And then this is Central Coast Community Energy, which everybody in our region is now on board with. Even Atascadero just approved. They're not enrolled yet, but they approved doing that. So the only holdout is the County of San Luis Obispo. So apologies if anybody is in those areas. So they have a great incentive and rebate program that's tied to transportation. But the really interesting thing about this is that there's an EV readiness piece. So they'll actually help to cover the cost of the electrical upgrade in order to get the EV charger. There's a new construction electrification program, but at this time it's really just for new affordable housing. And so there's new programs in the work, but so keep an eye on that. But just as a quick case study is that I just talked to a friend this morning who was on his way to pick up his new electric vehicle. So on the vehicle itself, he's getting a $2,000 rebate. These tiers are based on income. So he was in the baseline income, but if you're lower income, you get more incentive. Then his EV charger, he got a rebate on that, and he got one of those charge point ones that's smart, so he can program it to charge at the right time. And then he got $2,000 off of his electrical panel upgrade. And I think all told, I think he was spending $3,000, but doing some of the work himself. So maybe it was a $4,000 or $5,000 upgrade because he had to pull a bunch of wires from someplace. So he's feeling like he's got a $30,000 setup for like $12,000. And if you're an income qualified, it'd be even less than that. So there are some pretty exciting things going on with incentives. And of course, that's for a vehicle, but now he's got the panel upgrade, right? So that takes out some of the stressors that we had on everything else. So those are the stories from the field, and we'd be happy. I'm going to stop share. Yeah, actually, before people disappear, we'll circle back to discussion, but I do want to make sure that we touch on that 3C Ren, they're a fabulous partner. We love working with them, and they have a ton of great classes coming up. Do go to 3C Ren and sign up. I just signed up for this. There's another one on, the embodied carbon by design. So a lot of great classes coming up, and you can always go to 3cren.org. So with that, I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions, discussions, if people want to chime in on, their own stories from the field. You can certainly unmute once Michelle recognizes you.
Thanks, Andy. And I did want to recognize it is 1 o'clock. And so if people want to jump off, feel free. We did discuss with Dee and Ashley early on that folks are used to jumping off at once. So absolutely feel free to do it. If you want to stay on, we've got maybe 4 or 5 questions in the lineup, and you're free to add them to the chat. You can also raise your hand and I can call on you. I wanted to give Dee just a chance to say anything in closing if you wanted to before we jump in.
No, nothing here. Just thank you so much. This is amazing content.
Awesome. We've still got over 30 people on the call, so let's dive right in. So a quick question. We're going to be going back into the content of the presentation, circling back on electricity. So have we had any issues in terms of upgrading panels and having a cost embedded either from SCE or PG&E in the drops from the pole? I mean, we see that there's cost for the panel itself, but is there upgrading of the line coming out of the pole that is costing people? Do we not?
You're muted though. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I had to go unmute again. Mike and I were just talking about that. Too bad he can't be here, but one of the things none of our projects have had to worry about that so much yet. But one of Mike's projects, I was just looking at the pictures. He had 2 existing 60 amp panels and they needed to upgrade. And so they were able to they coordinated with PG&E. I don't know what the cost was to deal with the drop. Everything was overhead, but they did have to bring that into a new box. And then they did upgrade to a 200 amp panel. And I think he told me that was between 45 to 6,000 for the whole thing. So I can tell you that just upgrading the panel in our area is around 35 to 4,500. So probably the extra had to do with the drop and everything. That's what my assumption was.
Great. And then a related question, Jessica was asking about electrifying rentals. We talked a little bit about the incentives, but she's also wondering, are there codes that are relevant for rental properties as maybe they look to electrifying?
For existing construction, if you're going as far as what the energy code requires, there's recommendations that you install the electric now, but there isn't really anything that's going to force any existing structures to become all electric. But there's definitely, we're trying to put in incentives in it. California is definitely heading towards all electric, but if you have an existing structure, if you want to go all electric, then you would be following all the codes that deal with installing electric, and just like you would with new construction. But it's only new construction where for 2022 code coming up takes effect next January, and almost a year from now, then it's going to be more heavily weighted to be all electric for new construction.
Good. Moving to some of the specific equipment, a question about water heaters. So Dwight was asking about mini split water heaters with an exterior condenser.
Yes.
I have not heard of those. So what can you say?
Yes. Gee, oh, you have, Michelle. You have. That's the ones that we refer to as the Sandin or Sanco units. And they're that's the brand name that's available, readily available in our area now. And it's an outdoor condensing unit that only requires that 15 amp outdoor circuit. And then the water pipes themselves are insulated and they go into the indoor tank. We're a huge fan of those products mostly. Well, they work very, very well, but also because the refrigerant is CO2. Really low global warming potential with a CO2 refrigerant. I really like 475. It's possible to get the unit for less money than that, so shop around. But usually we say, okay, for that type of unit, it's between 5,000 and 6,000. The integrated type, like the type Michelle installed, is a couple of thousand. So, but there's some serious advantages to having the compressor outdoors with the tank of water indoors. We've got a multifamily project now that was a series of duplexes and quadplexes, and they opted for that exact unit. And even though it was more expensive, you know, the initial cost, you think, oh God, that's like $3,000 more. But when we looked at the whole project, it turns out that was the most cost-effective solution, because all the other solutions were going to cost thousands and thousands to deal with: the extra closet, venting, being able to have easy maintenance for the maintenance person to come and not get inside people's units. So they needed the outdoor access and then the door. It all added up. They just, no, it turns out this solution was really easy. The tank went inside an existing closet. No need for any maintenance people to come in. There's no electricity, no moving parts. It's just a warm tank of water.
And I should have added that. That was a good point, actually. I should have added that to the options for the heat pump water heater storage and venting requirements, is just get a split system in the first place. So thanks.
Yeah, that's can sometimes solve a lot of the problems. You know what? We'll throw a slide in for the next one.
Yeah, thanks. Good feedback.
I think I got thrown off by the mini part. I don't think of an 80-gallon tank.
Right, exactly. We just didn't call it the same thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Question about induction cooktops. Let me see. I got to find it here from Jessica. No, sorry, from Izzy. Would switching to an induction countertop appliance pull as much energy as a full induction appliance, potentially resulting in an upgrading panel situation?
Right. You're talking like get that single burner, the two
the
burner.
double. Yeah. What are the considerations? Yep. How do you do the math on that?
Those, I mean, it's going to be like, it's like plugging in another microwave. And so depending on your kitchen, and I can tell you from experience with my old house. So what we did is I had a single burner induction, and I had my 1500, watt microwave. And then I do have the toaster oven, and my house is crazy, but it was all wired so that the outdoor outlet was on the same circuit. And that's why I was trickle charging my car. And yeah, I turn on the mic. My kids wanted to toast while I was doing all the other stuff. And yeah, it just blows the 20 amp circuit. I gotta go outside and flip it, unplug my car. Don't use the toaster oven until I'm done. And then I kept cooking. So, I mean, it doesn't need a new panel, but it might tax your circuit, your breaker in your kitchen, depending on your kitchen. But a lot of larger kitchens they'll split it up so that you don't have everything on one circuit like my old little house does. So
So it might depend on the circuitry and the age of your home or your recent upgrades versus the overall panel size or something.
Yeah. But just
I plug
adding a
in my
microwave.
vacuum and the whole bedroom drops its electricity.
Right? But the slide-in induction that I'm going to get, that's got the oven, the 4 burners, the whole kit and caboodle, that thing, it needs a 40 amp circuit, 240 volt on its own. And that piece of equipment is going to cause me to make my panel bigger or need to upgrade the panel. If I hadn't have gone to the mini splits and hadn't been charging my, car charger and all that, it's my house, it's like one or the other. And I opted for the mini splits air conditioning, to get that going in the car first. And then I'll get the stove. It'll just barely make it. And then I'm going to upgrade the panel.
Great. We've got one last question in the queue here, and I'll put out a final call for folks to put your question in the chat if you'd like. And this might be for Andy. Let's see. Jessica's asking, how do community solar shares compare in price to buying or leasing on-site PV?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure about the community solar shares, if there's a specific program they're talking about, or, and feel free to unmute if there's a particular thing that you want to chime in on there. I will say, like, for community choice energy, that the CCAs typically have followed the kind of just under the cycle of the public utility. So if PG&E's price was this, then they would kind of, match underneath. And they're actually just now having these really big policy debates about how to price electricity for the CCAs, which are, carbon free. So they might not necessarily be renewable yet, depending on which option you're purchasing and where they are in their own procurement, right? But so it could have large scale hydro, I guess is the point there. No nuclear. So that's an option. The most cost effective right now is still to buy your own. And because at some point you're done, right? You paid them off, or either it's cash or it's a loan, and you're just getting free electricity. But again, it's a little tricky because you're still tied to the grid. And as we saw in an almost crisis, is that the Public Utility Commission was supporting PG&E and the utility SEs bid to have a really significant monthly charge to just tie into the grid, $40 a month or something. Just even if you're generating all your own electricity, you might have $40 just to be a part of the grid. So that's a little concerning and a bit of a variable in terms of owning your own, which I guess then goes back to that leasing and I don't know the contract details. In terms of, if they tell you, look, it's $150 a month from Sunrun or whoever's doing your lease, and then the CPUC changes up the rules, do they get to, tamper with that agreement? So that was a mushy answer. Jennifer, do you have?
They'll pass the cost. So let's say that they did go through with that, and I think it was like $57 a month for the tie-in costs. And then if that happens, then this is how they explain it to me, is that if that happens after everything's installed, they could still pass it on. Technically, get it installed. It's like only $10 to be grid tied now, or something real small. And then if that increases, they can pass that on. That piece of it. Then everything else is supposed to be all included. And so the one thing, like a third party leasing company, they don't have any control over that either. And that's, $57 compared to the $150, it's almost a 30%, difference. So they can't guarantee and cover that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got thanks coming in on the chat. We'll close it out here. It is 1:15, and we want to thank everybody for staying on the line. I think it was a nice discussion, and we covered a broad range of topics. I have put our email addresses in the chat for folks. If we missed your question, you think of something later on, feel free to contact Andy, Jennifer, myself. And we look forward to the next time we can see everybody here at SBAIA. I'll hand it off to Dee if she wants to close us out, or if Ashley has any announcements.
Nothing to add here. Just thank you again, all of you. This was really fabulous.
One
Right.
quick announcement, tomorrow
Uh-oh.
there's a Pixar for emerging professionals. So just a reminder, if you want to come out and join everyone, make certain to make it over to, I think it's the Third Window Brewing Company. All right, and I think that's
will you
it.
be sharing the recording with everyone since you're kind
Yes,
of
I'll be sharing. It'll be up on YouTube probably.
Okay, and we'll provide our slides either directly to you or to 3C Ren and coordinate that as well.
All right, sounds good. All right,
Great.
thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thanks.